We want to make sure that we're not just putting the money into the leagues and the new franchises and media deals, which we're seeing incredible growth from. But there is a whole other part of the ecosystem in sport that we need to address, which is the pipeline. You know, these young girls that are coming up through the pipeline, there's also opportunity there.
This is another episode of The Winning Formula presented by Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Stefanie Strack, founder and CEO of Voice in Sport.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about women's sports and more specifically, sports participation for younger girls and some of the barriers they might face while participating in the game. Before we start, I do want to highlight some really compelling stats. You and I discussed, according to an EY report, 94% C-suite female leaders have played sports, and 80% of female Fortune 500 CEOs participated in sports at some point of their lives, which indicates a very strong link between sports participation and female leadership. In your view, what is it about sports that builds strong leaders?
I love that stat. First of all, it's one of my favorite stats. And if you dive deeper into the stat, actually 52% of collegiate or of C-suite women played college sports. So there's this really intrinsic tie between the women who played sports and continued with it and then went on to leadership positions. I'm a product of that as a founder and CEO. I played college sports and started when I was really young. And for me, it's kind of like getting reps. You know, you as a young athlete in sport, you understand the impact of pressure. You understand what it means to fail, how to work with a team, how to be in a specific role one day and then maybe have to shift to another role the next day. So it's really about reps, and that reps builds confidence. And also for me as a young woman in a pretty, dominant male industry of sports, it helps you have the confidence for when you walk into those rooms and you're the only woman in that room.
There's actually a very sad reality. According to research, by age 14, girls drop out of sports at twice the rate of boys. Can we dive into this stat a little bit more? What are some of the barriers they're facing?
Also, one of my favorite, but also worst stats. As a mom of a 12-year-old daughter who's playing sports right now, I'm working so hard to try to make sure that all of our daughters don't drop out. Some of the assumptions that we're kind of all working off of right now in the industry is that there is a lack of access and participation opportunities for young girls. If you take a look at high school in the United States as an example, there's 1.3 million fewer opportunities for young girls in high school to play sports. And then if you go to college, 93% of the schools, NCAA, are actually offering fewer opportunities to the girls than they are to the boys. So access and participation is one. Another, unfortunately, in the United States is cost. The cost of playing sports, especially for youth sports, is continuing to increase. The third kind of area that we're focused on at Voice in Sport is really like what happens around puberty for young girls. So that's when your bodies start to develop, young girls get breasts, they start to menstruate. And at that time, there's also a huge correlation to, young girls stopping to play sports. So there really is like a multifaceted reason of why young girls are dropping out of sport. But our research, which will be coming out soon with the NFL, will hopefully help all of us in the industry understand, okay, what is sort of the number one reason?
Right.
And then 2, 3, 4, so we can start tackling them together.
Is it due to funding, the lack of funding that's going into creating these resources and infrastructure?
It's a great question. So Title IX is an incredible law that is really there to help, ensure that discrimination doesn't happen in public institutions where you're receiving federal funding. But when you look at what's happening in those schools, it's actually, there is money there. It's just how the institutions are using that money within the school. And then that's really where the issues are. So the first issue is that they're essentially creating more sports teams for boys than they are for girls. And that's the participation gap. And that's the people in the leadership positions, the athletic directors, the people leading these organizations that are making that decision on their own. Again, nothing to do with money. The second part is scholarships. That is a financial piece. So Title IX mandates that you have to have equitable in proportionality spend on scholarship dollars between women and men.
Right.
And still across the NCAA, young women are receiving fewer scholarship dollars. And then the third doesn't have anything really to do with necessarily the money coming in, but it's the experience. And so that equitable experience for young girls shows up in things like inequities across the type of fields they have access to, the type of coaches or how many coaches they get, or even something as simple as the media coverage. So it's not just about the money and where it's coming in, but it's the experience that's unfortunately created for these young women.
Yeah, growing up as an athlete yourself, you mentioned that you skied growing up in Alaska. Were there any role models to look up to in terms of female skiers or female athletes in general?
Yeah, this is a big reason why I built Voice in Sport. I grew up in an incredible family with a father who was an Olympic ski racer. So I was on skis before I could even walk, pretty much. And I went into that sport and I became quite good. I won Junior Olympics when I was 15. Wow. I was also, multi-sport athlete, so I was playing soccer. But at the time in Alaska, there was no access to women athlete role models. It was really hard for me to have a woman coach in ski racing. Mm-hmm. And then I didn't have a support system. So I actually ended up dropping out of ski racing and going down the soccer path because I didn't have a community in ski racing. And that, unfortunately, is happening still today across the United States for girls in every sport, where they might not have access to role models, to women coaches, or to getting into the sport. So it's a big reason of why I started Viz.
Yeah, speaking of Viz, I would love to learn a little bit more about the organization and its mission. And sounds like a lot of why you founded this organization is from your own personal experience as well.
It's unfortunate to say, but even as like a successful young athlete, I had struggles. I wasn't training as I should be as a woman athlete. I didn't understand how to train with my body, with my period. Mm-hmm. And then I struggled with body image issues. At the time when I was growing up, what was seen in the media as beautiful was something very much not my body type.
Right.
And that caused, a lot of internal, self-reflection and unfortunately brought me into a space of losing confidence in my body at a really young age. So that's something that I really don't want to see happen to my daughter or any other young girl out there. So it's so incredibly important to build a new ecosystem for young girls that helps them access these role models, content that is better and educational that helps them guide them on how do I prepare for sport when I'm on my period? How should I think about sleeping and fueling my body? And then another area which I didn't have was access to sports psychologists and registered dietitians. So at Voice in Sport, we have over 100 of them that young girls can use in our app. They can go to one-on-one appointments or group sessions, and they can learn about all the things that I didn't learn about or have access to when I was younger.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Voice in Sport clubs that you partner with different schools and all these initiatives you're doing there?
Yeah, Voice in Sport was centered around the idea of like young women's voices were missing from the sport ecosystem when I started Viz in 2019. And so one of the things I felt like was really important was to go into the public schools where the majority of, the inequities were happening for these young girls and empower them to figure out a way in order to drive change. So I ended up starting two organizations. We have the Voice in Sport platform, which is the digital app that keeps girls in sport through mentorship and wellness services. But then we started the Voice in Sport Foundation really to go in and advocate for change in the local communities. So any young girl in a public school can join Voice in Sport Foundation and start a club at their school. It's an official club. And you have a board, you become a president or the treasurer, and you form your board. And then these young women actually work with their school to get their school back to Title IX compliance. And it starts with education. So the Voice in Sport Foundation comes in and we deliver a Title IX training to these young women. They then become the experts in Title IX, probably more than their administrators, honestly, because there is no formal Title IX training across the United States for these school administrators. So they become experts. They then use our toolkit to evaluate their school for Title IX compliance. And I'm sad to say that 93% of the schools fail when we do these tests. And then they put together an action plan, and that action plan is meant to help the school get back to Title IX compliance.
Wow, that's 93%. That's a pretty surprising stat.
Yeah.
And then it's amazing that your organization is doing all the work from that level. Can you talk a little bit about how Voice in Sport is scaling its impact through partnerships with organizations like WNBA?
Absolutely. We can't do this alone. Viz has created this incredible digital platform for young women that can join as members, and it's free to join. But we can't do that alone. We need to find the right partners that are also invested in growing the sport and helping the pipeline of young women stay in sport. So I'm so proud of our partnership with the WNBA. We're in our second year in the WNBA partnership, and that's really rooted in how do we keep young girls in sport through the power of mentorship. So we partnered with everyone in the Changemaker Group, which is an organization of brands that are really dedicated to keeping young girls in sport. And we have over about 16 WNBA mentors on the platform that are trained as mentors. And then we provide mentorship to girls everywhere. And what's really, I think, unique about the partnership is that, they're the biggest women's league in the world.
Yeah.
And they have been doing some incredible work to reach young girls in camps, in clinics, one by one, since they started the WNBA. But with Viz and our technology that we have with our app and platform, we can accelerate that impact. So in the first year, we mentored over 50,000 girls. In the second year, we're mentoring again another 50,000 girls. So the impact we can have when we come together with a digital tech platform like Viz and our content studio, and then the power of the awareness that the WNBA brings, that's when we'll have such incredible impact for girls.
That's amazing. What do you think it means for young girls like that to be able to communicate or to be able to have these education sessions with role models like the WNBA players? Because for you yourself, you just mentioned growing up, you didn't really have that community, those mentors to look up to or to communicate with.
Yeah.
How do you think it's going to change sort of the future of women's sports?
Well, let's start with where we started the conversation.
Yeah.
Number one is we hope that less girls drop out of sport,
Right.
because they have access to a community that is there to support them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our number one goal. The second thing we're seeing is that 80% of the girls that go through the program are 80% more confident after they go through at least 2 of the sessions at Voice in Sport. So that's a huge lift in how they feel, not just about themselves in sport, but how they feel about themselves in the community. So young girls that are mentored are more likely to take on leadership positions, which is a powerful connection. So I think that, we're keeping our eye on the indicators of success. Long term, it's about keeping more young girls in sport. Short term, it's about powering them up with confidence and making sure they have access to more evidence-based research and content. And that's really why, outside of the mentorship and the wellness services, that's why we built the Viz Studio. We wanted to make sure that we were delivering content to these young girls. It was showcasing these incredible role models, but also delivering them, inspiration and understanding about their bodies. So we talk a lot about menstruation in sport at Viz.
Mm-hmm.
We talk a lot about sleep. We talk a lot about body image and confidence. And those are the things that, young girls need to hear more of.
How do you measure success for you? How do you measure the return of investment? And what are some of the key indicators you look at?
Short term, we're really looking at how are we affecting their confidence today and how they feel and what knowledge do they understand about their bodies. So we understand when they come into Voice in Sport, what they know about these different topics of mental health, nutrition, body image, and then what they understand, 3 months later, 6 months later, et cetera. Longer term, it's really about looking at, are we keeping more girls in sport? Are we avoiding that drop off at age 14 and then that second drop off at age 17? So those are our 2 most critical indicators. But, we also are looking long term. We believe that when girls stay in sport for longer, they then become leaders, women leaders. Mm-hmm. And like you sitting here at the table, like me running my company. So we want to look and see, are we affecting the change at leadership levels? Are more women getting into C-suite positions? And we think sport is a huge vehicle to get there. So those are the Viz numbers. But then, when it comes to our partners, each one of them have commercial areas of focus that they're trying to deliver on and brand awareness that they're trying to build. And so, we're looking at not just being, an impact partner to our brand partners, but also somebody who can help drive commercial value. And we do that through the Viz Studio. We do that through showing up at events. One of our largest partners is Sephora, where we were at the Olympics in Paris, and we that was an incredible example of how we not only brought in a mentorship program with over 10 Olympic athletes from France to girls in France, but also like how we help them bring awareness to Sephora during the actual Olympics through content in the Viz Studio.
So we've seen a tremendous growth of women's sports in terms of revenue, the sponsorship markets, just general fandom and awareness. I do want to talk about how that growth could be a pathway to address some of the challenges we just discussed. How do you see this growth impacting the funding and resources for girls' sports?
That is a great question. That's really why we stood up the Voice in Sport Foundation and the Voice in Sport platform, so that there could be other vehicles to grow the entire ecosystem, because we want to make sure that we're not just putting the money into the leagues and the new franchises and media deals, which we're seeing incredible growth from. But there is a whole other part of the ecosystem in sport that we need to address, which is the pipeline. These young girls that are coming up through the pipeline, there's also opportunity there. So with the Voice in Sport platform is a great way to invest, right? Anyone can invest in a membership for a young girl. They can sponsor an entire team or create a program around a specific topic, whether that's mental health or menstruation, and help fuel the pipeline of change. And then if they really want to get into the inequities conversation, it happens at these public schools. Yep. Not enough people talk about it. They talk a lot about the salaries of the top players in the world, and that is so key. But we also need to address the inequities for, 95% of the women playing sports, which is public schools. So we can do that with the Voice in Sport Foundation.